Audi already has Nico Hulkenberg locked down to a 3-year deal, but Scott, who do you think should be alongside him at Sauber next year?
Well, it's a simple answer, I think, on the evidence of the last few races of this season. It's Franco Colapinto. He's done a fantastic job as a slightly surprise replacement mid-season for Logan Sargent at Williams. He had a solid, if unspectacular, debut, but basically was pretty much at Sargent's kind of upper limit straight out the blocks at Monza. And he's just gone from strength to strength there. Scored points in Baku, where he was right on Alex Albon's pace. Then in Singapore, I think he might have even had the edge on Albon, certainly very, very close to him, and was on course to beat him on merit in the Grand Prix after a stunning first lap move. Obviously, Albon retired from that race, so we didn't exactly see how it's going to play out, but Colapinto's basically shown himself to be F1 worthy almost immediately. He's done in just a few races what he could have hopefully aimed for by the end of the season. I think it would be a no-brainer for Sauber to seriously go after him now.
So Scott, you're going with youth, but Ed, if you were advising Mattia Binotto, what would you tell him to do?
I would absolutely suggest that he sticks with Valtteri Bottas. This is a team that desperately needs to make some progress over the next 12 months and beyond. In fact, they've wasted a lot of their run-in time to becoming the Audi Works team in 2026, and they need experienced drivers who can really bring that experience to bear in terms of sharpening up the team. Now, you could argue Bottas has been there for 3 seasons and hasn't made much difference, but the team hasn't really been listening to the drivers as much as it should do. He's got a vast amount of experience. He's a great team player. He's still very, very quick. He's performing at a high level, and I think actually Valtteri Bottas, if they can fully utilise him and engage him in a way that they've probably not done since the early days there before Fred Vasseur left, then they've got a great performer who can really help accelerate that progress in terms of sharpening up the team, strengthening the team, because I just think that's their absolute priority. They desperately need to make gains. They've wasted too much time. You need experience in this scenario.
Yeah, but they've already got experience in Nico Hulkenberg, the driver that is already signed up for next season. I don't see that Bottas offers a great deal more. If you're looking for a balanced lineup than what Hulkenberg already does, Colapinto's a move for the future, which is kind of something that Audi and Sauber have not necessarily neglected, but they've screwed up for the reasons basically Ed was outlining there, with how inefficient they've been as a programme the last 2 or 3 years, certainly since Audi bought into it. So I just think Colapinto is a good way for them to kind of set themselves up for the future, especially as we're not entirely sure what Binotto thinks of Hulkenberg, because Hulkenberg isn't a Binotto hire. It was Andreas Seidel, the guy who was there in charge of things beforehand. So I would say that if you've got that sort of experienced driver there for the short term, maybe the medium term, that's great, but supplement him with a Colapinto who just gives you an exciting youthful prospect, and on the evidence of what we've seen so far, isn't going to be a downgrade on Bottas in terms of pace and performance.
But that's the big problem at the moment for Audi. Hulkenberg has F1 experience, Bottas has team experience. He brings continuity, and I think this is a team that has far too much said, oh, we'll sort this out in the future. They need to absolutely maximise what they're doing in 2025, which is why I think probably what's been talked about is a 1+1 contract, so definitely Bottas for next year, then consider more for 2026. I think they really, really need to make the most use of it. The debate would be different if it was a different team, a different scenario. Colapinto is a really, really strong driver. I've been really impressed by what he's done. But I think in the scenario Audi is in, their specific situation, they need 2 drivers with the experience, and they need the one who's got the continuity to realise what they failed to do over the past 2.5 to 3 years, and what they need to do very quickly if this team is to actually get to where it needs to be.
I just think the whole organisation would benefit from something that adds a little impetus, a little bit of excitement to what's going on. And as much as I really like Bottas, and I think he is a perfectly good pick, I think if Colapinto hadn't come in and done what he's done the last couple of races, I wouldn't be sat here advocating for someone other than Bottas, I suspect. I think he's perfectly sensible, but it just feels like it's just a bit too flat, and what that team needs is something that's going to lift it. And I'm amazed that you're not agreeing with me, Ed, considering you're the great Kamui Kobayashi advocate from 2009.
Yeah, I do like drivers who come in and really seize the moment, and I think Colapinto's done great. And I absolutely believe that Colapinto deserves a drive in Formula One in the future. If he keeps doing what he's doing this season, he's going to end up somewhere in the future, even if it's not next year. But yeah, I feel this is a team that an inexperienced driver like Colapinto would end up probably being wasted and sunk in. And I think that they need to take seriously the need to sharpen up. They've wasted time. And I think Colapinto would maybe risk, with not having the experience, just getting carried away by the tide of a team that's drifting too much. Whereas Bottas, actually, if you say to him, right, we've squandered you recently, what exactly do we need to do? What have we done wrong? He brings that sort of institutional memory of what they failed at recently. And I think that can be invaluable in terms of sharpening up over the next 12 months.
Colapinto's already shown, though, what he can do under pressure. Being dumped in the Williams mid-season was a huge challenge, and he's really risen to that. So why can't he do the same at Sauber and Audi? I think he'd be a great driver in those circumstances. I think the team itself has kind of overlooked you for a little too long. They had Teo Porcher on the sidelines and never gave him a chance. Guan Yu Zhou obviously was a rookie with Sauber, but that was more for commercial reasons. So I think they need to go back to their roots and look at the likes of Kimi Raikkonen and Charles Leclerc, all these great young drivers they've given a chance to. There's one right here, ready for the taking. But there is also another, and I want to throw in a third option. Gabriel Bortoleto, of course, the McLaren junior. He's leading the F2 standings, and of course, F2 is anything but a level playing field, so you can't read too much into the points, but he's had a really, really impressive year. He was on pole on debut, and that's something that only I think Leclerc has done in 2 decades of the second tier. And he's just had a really impressive season. And much like Colapinto has kind of forced his way into this argument. And as much as all the reasons and the good job that Colapinto has done, I think that only increases the case for Bortoleto, because Bortoleto has been even more impressive and is also a couple of years younger. So he might actually be the even more exciting chance to be in there at Sauber.
The problem with Bortoleto is the availability, and I think Colapinto's in a similar position. But Bortoleto just feels like someone that McLaren wants to hang on to longer term, and there have been some discussions around him, and it just feels like McLaren will ask for a bit too much to let Bortoleto go. They don't really want to let him go completely as a full Sauber Audi driver long term. They want a little bit of a claim to him if necessary. He has only just joined. He's not someone that they've sunk, years and years of development into, but they have started putting him in an old F1 car. He's going to get FP1 outings. I suspect he'll be the one, as long as he doesn't do a Sauber deal before then, that races in the end of season rookie race, if that comes off, which it looks likely to do. And yes, Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri is hopefully going to be McLaren's long-term future, but you don't throw away a driver like Bortoleto if he's on your books.
The testing thing is interesting because, as Alonso said, Bortoleto is in some ways the only true F2 rookie. If you look at someone like Kimi Antonelli at Mercedes and he had this big private testing program, Bortoleto hasn't really had any of that and has done such a good job in F2. It's also important to note that he's an Alonso protege, and who is better than getting out of a McLaren contract than Fernando Alonso, who's got out of 2 of them. So I think, don't underestimate the influence that Alonso and his management team can have there. They must have known when they signed this deal with McLaren that, Norris and Piastri were going to be the future at McLaren. So I wonder if there's some kind of clause in there or some kind of way of getting out of it to make sure that their driver gets in an F1 seat soon.
In many ways, it's a good situation for Sauber to be in because there are 3 credible options. Now, there's the question of can they get Bortoleto out of the McLaren contract? That could be tricky. Colapinto is obviously contracted to Williams. They're willing to deal. I think Williams will be a little bit more malleable on this. It's not entirely clear how much it would cost, and certainly his value's gone up. But he seems easier to extract than Bortoleto because they have Sainz and Albon signed up for the next couple of years, and there's perhaps not that fear that they may lose one of them, the McLaren drivers they've got with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. And then you've got Bottas, who is just the line of least resistance, and that perhaps helps his cause. He's ready to sign a contract. He can sign on the dotted line right now, should they want him to. There won't be any peripheral problems, and they'll definitely own him long term. So I think that's another tick in the Bottas box in terms of what he can offer. But there's some negotiations to be done for Sauber, and you never know, they might be able to get one of Bortoleto or Colapinto more easily than could be the case.
I know everything always comes back to Bottas for you, Ed, especially when we're having a discussion about who Sauber should sign. I actually think the point you made in the middle of that about Colapinto and his value is really interesting, because if Sauber had been a little bit more on the front foot about this, even not necessarily before Colapinto was in F1, because he was properly on the periphery there. You're doing a good job in his rookie F2 season, but not, stunningly obvious as a candidate. If it had looked at what he did in Monza, for example, and gone, actually, do you know what? This is a really promising young driver, and moved in then, it's a different conversation to what they're having with Williams now, because the price to get him out of that Williams deal is going to be a lot higher, just purely because when it's a seller's market and the driver in question is doing a good job, Williams can name its price. But also, Williams is now recognising that Colapinto's a much more serious prospect for its F1 team in the future because of the job he's doing now. So You mentioned Norris and Piastri might get snapped up, but Alex Albon and Carlos Sainz could rapidly be proven to be too good for Williams if that revival takes too long to pick up. So Williams might be now looking at Colapinto as a driver that actually 27, 28, something like that. We might really need this driver. So as much as I'm not ceding ground to Edd in this grand debate over who it should sign, I can well imagine that not just for Bortoleto, but also Colapinto, they might just be a little bit more trouble than they're worth, whereas Bottas really is the easiest option.
Where I think Sauber needs to be very, very clear is if they sign a Colapinto or a Bortoleto, they need to make sure that they're not on loan, that they're there for the long term, because that's the key part of the argument for them. It's long term, it's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. They don't just need to prepare a driver for McLaren or keep a driver warm for Williams. It needs to be a Sauber Audi driver for the long term. And again, maybe Bottas helps that because they can have him for a year or two, and then perhaps they could be stronger in the market and get somebody better for 2027 or beyond.